With recursion and iteration, the idea is that you're going to take terms that were previous and add them together to get the next term. So the idea with the Fibonacci sequence, which is one of the most common recursive sequences, you take the previous two terms, 1 and 1, and add them together, get 2. To get 3, you would take 1 plus 2. To get 5, you would take 3 plus 2. To get 8, you would take 5 plus 3. So the previous two terms give you the next term. So for 55, it would be 34 plus 21, and so on. So the Tower of Hanoi problem can be done in 7 moves by moving previous disks forward and then recursively solve the problem by moving the final disk forward. So the Tower of Hanoi problem is the one where you have those balls that are in like those columns, and you have to take the columns of the colored balls and you move them forward and backwards so you get all the blues. They're all mixed up and you get all the blues in one column and you get the other ones in another column and you get the other ones in another column. So every single column has a different color and you can only move one colored ball at a time to move them around. So that's the Tower of Hanoi problem. The first example of recursion would be to find the first 5 terms of a sequence with a sub 1 equals 1 and a sub 2 is equal to 4. The way you read this is a sub 1 equals 1 and a sub 2 equals 4. So to get the next term, you would take the previous two terms and add them together according to this rule. So this is the previous term and this is the previous term. So the next term, if I took 1 as my first term and I took 4 as my next term and so on, I would find the next term by adding those terms together. So what I would do is I would say, okay, the first term is a 1, and the next term then would be a 4. And that means that if I wanted to find the next term, okay, what I would do is I would add the two previous ones. So 1 plus 4 is 5. So that would be my next term. And then my next term would be 4 plus 5, which is 9. And then my next term would be adding the previous two according to this rule. So that would be 14. So the first 5 terms of the sequence would be 1, 4, 5, 9, and 14. So now for this one, it says find the first 7 terms of the sequence with your first term being -2, your second term being 6, your third term being 10. And then the rule is you take, to find the next term, you take 3 times the previous 3 terms added together. So just to give you a perspective, your first term would be -2. Okay, your next term would be 6. Your next term would be 10. And then in order to find the next term, what you would do is you would take the previous 3 terms, you add them together, and then you multiply by 3. So 10 plus 6 is 16. 16 plus -2 is 14. 14 times 3 is 42. Okay, and every time that I get a new term, that's considered my previous term for my next one. So that's 42. Now I go to my next term. You take the previous 3 terms, so these 3, add them together. So 42 plus 10 is 52. 52 plus 6 is 58. And then what I would do is I would take 58 and I would multiply that by 3. So that would give me 174. And that would be my next term. Now, what I would do in order to find the next term, because I want to find the first 7, is I would take the previous 3, which is these 3 right here. So 174, and I would add 42, and I would add 10, which is 226, and then I would multiply that by 3, and that would be 678. So that would be my next one. And then, of course, to figure out the next one, you would go ahead then and add these 3 together, 1, 2, 3, add them together and then multiply by 3. And that would be your next term. And that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that would be your 7th term. So 678 plus 174 plus 42 would give you 894, and then you would multiply that by 3 and you get 2,682. So 2,682. All right, so those would be your first 7 terms. Now, that's an example of recursion. There's also something called iteration. And iteration works like this. You have a formula or a rule, and then you have an initial value, which is not part of your actual iterated sequence. And then you figure out the first term by plugging in the initial term into the formula, and that's going to be your, so like for this one, it says find the first three iterations, or iterates is what they're called, of y equals 4x minus 5 for an initial value of x sub 0 equals 2. So this is your first number. You plug in the number 2. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 minus 5 is 3. So now I have the number 3. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the number 3 and I'm going to plug in the number 3 into this formula. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 minus 5 is 7. So now 7 is my next number. Now that I get 7, I take my previous term, which is 4 times 7 is 28. 28 minus 5 is 23. So those would be your first three iterates. So on this worksheet, on this one, it says you're going to take, in order to find your next term, you need to take your previous term and add 7. So since the first number is a 10, you're going to have 10 be your first number. And then it looks like all you do is just add the previous number plus 7. So 10 plus 7 would give you 17. And then you would say, okay, so now the next number is 17. You take your previous number 17 and you would add 7. So then it'd be 24. So then you would just continue to do this where you just keep adding 7 because that's what the rule says. The rule says to find the next term, you take the previous term and you add 7. For number 2, for this recursive formula, you have your first term, which is a 3. You have your second term, which is an 8. And what it says to do with it is it says to take your previous terms. And according to this, you take your previous term and add your previous term. So this is the Fibonacci sequence, essentially. So add these two together, you would get 11. Now that I have a new number, okay, I'm going to take this one and the previous one. So 11 plus 8 would be 19. Okay, and I'm going to let you figure out the next one. But the next one would be 19 added to 11. So 19 and 11, so pretty easy there. So that's how you would do those first ones. Okay. Then when you get down to this recursive formula for number 3, okay, it says that you take -4 times your previous term to get your next term. So if you have your first term, which is -5, okay, what you're going to do is you're going to take -5 as your first term. Okay, so here's -5. And then your next term, you would take your previous term and multiply it by, according to this, -4, according to this rule. So -4 times -5 is positive 20. And then you would take that term, which is your previous term, if you're trying to find your next one, and you'd multiply that by -4, which is -80. Okay, and then you would do that again and again until you get your first 5 terms. So this is -80. Sorry for the terrible number, but anyways, that's how you do that. So that takes care of the first 3. Then what you're going to do is when you get down to the iterates problems, where you're finding the first 4 iterates, the idea is that you take your sub-0 term and you just plug it in order to find your first one. So for the first one, for number 4, it says find the first 4 iterates of this equation right here. So it looks like the first number I'm going to plug in is 4 into this equation. So 10 times 4 is 40. 40 minus 8 is 32. So 32 is my first actual term because I plugged in my initial term, which is 4, but we don't include 4 in our iterate. Okay, now that I have number 32, I take the previous term, which is 10 times 32, which is 320. 320 minus 8 is 312. Okay, let's pretend that says 312. Then you would take 10 times 312 and subtract 8. So 10 times 312, subtract 8, be 3112. And you would consider that, I'm going to let you figure out the fourth one, but you would take 3112 then, 3,112, and you would plug that in for x right here, right for the 10. 10 times 3112, press equals, subtract 8, and that's going to be your next term. For this one, your x sub 0 is 6, so I'm going to use this formula. 6 squared is 36. 36 plus 2 is 38. So now that I have the number 38, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 38 and I'm going to square that. So 38 squared, or 38 times 38, and add 2, and I get 1446. Okay, and then last but not least, I'm going to take my 1446, I'm going to plug that in, I'm going to square that, so 1446 squared, and then I'm going to add 2 to that, and that would be a big number, 2,090,918. So 2,090,000. So 090. 918. Okay. So those would be your first three iterates for that one. And then this last one, I want you to kind of try on your own. But the idea is you're going to start out by plugging in -5. So 4 times -5 is -20. -20 plus 7 is 13. So -13. So -13 ends up being your first number. And then you're going to continue to plug this number into here for your next one. And then whatever number you get here, you're going to plug that one into here to find your next one. You do that for the first. And this one, it says find the first 5. So that is recursion and iteration.